Hi, I'm Austin Wintory, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today, I talked to Cris Velasco, who's a composer with a long and deep history in games. He has scored just an endless pile of massive AAA games, starting with Battlestar Galactica 20 odd years ago, covering franchises like Darksiders, and he worked on Mass Effect. He worked on a handful of God of War titles, and on and on and on and on. Bloodborne, there's so many. And we talk extensively about his really compelling journey into the world of games and just his life up to that point. And then move all around and end with a lovely discussion on his passion outside of games, which I think is one of the most novel and interesting passions of any of my composer friends. And I just loved hearing him talk about it. So it was a great chat. I hope you enjoy. Okay, well, Cris Velasco, this has been a long time coming. I've had you on my list with these guys for ages, and I'm so happy we're finally making this happen. Appreciate you carving out some time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a while, I think, since I've seen you.
Yeah, I feel like all the normal places where we might cross paths, GDC and that sort of stuff, I somehow haven't seen you. Um, uh, yeah, in like years, physically. I mean, at least other than the compulsory Twitter stalking to see the what's the latest going on and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I haven't even been to GDC for a while since 2020, actually.
Well, that
Um,
explains why I haven't seen you.
yeah,
I feel less bad now for somehow failing to cross paths. So that's good. You've absolved me from some self consciousness. Um, I there's a lot to talk about. Not least of which, shortly after we put this on the schedule, I was going to the Pantages and step out of the little parking lot right there, and there's a huge billboard looming over Hollywood Boulevard for the Lords of the Fallen,
oh, no way.
and yeah, like literally one block from Pantages, and it's not often you see the like full on like not a bus stop ad, but one of these like 4-story. It's half the size of half the side of a building. Um, Kind of ads for a game. So it was one of those where I was like, this is timely. It's this
That's
is
super cool. I had no idea. Now I'm gonna. Oh man, that drive into Hollywood. But yeah, I've got to go see it.
if I thought of it, I would have just taken you a photo and sent it your way, and you could like a sighting in the wild. But um, we'll culminate there. I would love. I know we've done this a little bit together. We did one of these. I can't remember what the occasion was, but when we did one of these together, I enjoyed hearing your backstory and that run up to Battlestar Galactica. But for the sake of due diligence, why don't you just set the table for us here on just where it all started for you? You know, the sort of road into specifically game music, um, and what sort of brought those initial opportunities your way.
All right. I've said this story so many times, so I think I can do a slightly shorter version because I tend to get carried away in the whole backstory, and then it's like, oh my God, that he just wanted to. It was one question. I took 30 minutes.
Well,
Um,
in fairness, this is a bit of a long form format, so I like it because for what it's worth, I've heard the story, but I also obviously our listeners may not have, but on top of that, I like when threads start to appear, and you really start to see those through lines that make up a person, which reflect in their work and also just who they are as a person, and those overlaps between output and input. And so don't feel the need to be super abridged. Though I'm
okay,
sure we both have things to do later today as well. So I'll let you reconcile those two things.
just give me one of these if it's taking
Yeah,
too long.
I'll start playing. I'll start doing the awards music, or the
Right,
microphone will start lowering on its own.
perfect. So yeah, my journey into music and composing, everybody's is obviously different. Um, I did not grow up in a musical household.
Hmm.
I didn't play anything. I wanted to play piano actually as a kid, but we didn't have a piano. And but my neighbor, I went over there one day and he was playing Star Wars, the theme to Star Wars on the piano, and I was like, "Oh my God, you can play that on the piano!" And like, I have to play this. Um, but then nothing for a very long time. And I did play guitar in a death metal band my last couple of years of high school. And from there, I went into like a junior college. I had no idea what I wanted to do. Nothing really stuck out as like, uh, this is a career path for me. Like I had no idea. So I just took a little bit of everything. And 2 years into that, for fun, I took a music appreciation class, and it just sounded fun. Like, well, it's a credit. I'll learn something. It'll be fun to learn about music, I suppose. And
What city is this
um,
taking place in?
Bakersfield, California.
Okay, yeah, one of the cultural hubs of Western civilization.
Actually, a lot of big country artists came from there.
It's true. It is a bit of
Um,
like California, Nashville in a very
mm,
legitimate way. I got a country singer friend who was like, she'd be horrified at my little snarky comment at Bakersfield because it is a bit of a gem, but still, especially with an inclining like well, I imagine metal puts you a bit on the outs there. I bet there's not a huge metal scene, although correct me if I'm wrong. I would have no idea.
um, Corn originated in Bakersfield too.
Really? I've never
Yeah,
known that.
yeah. I used to play shows with them, my band and Corn, and before they got big. So,
Holy shit,
um,
that's really good trivia.
yeah.
I literally never. That's so funny. You're like, actually, Korn and Tool and ACD, they're all from Bakersfield.
And the Beatles. I don't know if you knew
Yeah,
this, but
exactly. Bakersfield accent is very peculiar amongst American dialects.
yeah, a
All
lot of
right,
people think
forgive my
Liverpool.
derailment. Okay, so you're in
Um,
Bakersfield and you
in
take this
Bakersfield,
music appreciation
playing some
course.
metal, taking music appreciation. Um, this one day we were studying the music of the classical era, and and of course Mozart came up, and we're listening to his 40th symphony, which I'd never heard before, and I was nearly moved to tears in class. I couldn't believe this music. I'd never heard anything like it. It moved me on such a profound level, and I just had this like lightning strike of inspiration where I was like, this is what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to write music, and which is kind of weird because I'm now like 21, 22 or so, and I couldn't read music. I'd I'd maybe been to the symphony once before, but nothing that really stuck out. But I decided to stay in at that school for one more year and just take music classes. So theory and history and piano lessons. And I did they didn't really have a composition program there because it's just a junior college. But I took private composition lessons from the music teacher there. And then I put together a little portfolio and I applied to, a bunch of different schools. And by the way, when I'm putting my portfolio together, it was my symphony. And
Excellent.
I didn't have a keyboard. I couldn't play things in. There was no samples or anything. I had a Sound Blaster sound card on my dad's Macintosh, and I had a copy of Finale, and I clicked in every note with a mouse
So
by
funny. I did this.
hand.
This is like, yeah, it's so funny. I had Cakewalk, and would do the same. It was fundamental. It's not notation software, but it had the crude version. And it's exactly started the same way. I had no notion of MIDI input. It didn't even occur to me that that was an option. And so it was like
Yeah,
keyboard and mouse. It's crazy when you think about how much music like because I wrote probably hours worth of music over a few years that way, and in hindsight I'm like, how did I not deform, like, give myself arthritis? That's just, yeah. So I rarely meet somebody that had a similar kind of first entry point. I'm also, just as an aside, the notion of Mozart being that lightning bolt is so rare, because most people hear those canonized composers and it feels like that art form is now sort of sealed off. It's almost like it's a completed project. Whereas you hear John Williams or somebody like that, and you realize, oh, this is someone who's alive and doing it. That makes it feel more approachable. So there's something very uniquely cool about hearing arguably the most famous composer to have ever lived and going, you know what? I'd like to be up at bat for that guy's job. Like, there's something, I find that actually very awesome to kind of get it from such a deep down in the well kind of place.
Yeah, he was my gateway drug for sure. Like Mozart and then Schubert, and I always had this fantasy in the back of my head. And people have done it now, and I don't want to do it anymore. But finishing his unfinished symphony.
Right. Yeah. It's like, that and Beethoven's 10th, and there's a few of those that people have now with AI. I think oh
no,
there's probably 20 million Schubert finished symphonies per hour that we can listen to and take stock of, that are deeply like machine learned on his body of work kind of thing. But
it's gonna take a dark turn.
And so
anyway,
portfolio.
So I put together the one note at a time, clicked in portfolio.
What was the ambition? Like, this was just to be able to pursue like the next stage of a degree, or was there
I
any
wanted
kind
to
of
transfer into a university, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with music at the time. I thought, for me, the dream was back then, like, okay, I will study music and I will get my doctorate in music, and then I will teach at a university level, and that will give me access to the orchestra there, where I can just make them play my music. And so, applied to Cal Arts and UCLA. I wanted to stay in California. I got into both, and I went and I audited classes at both. And Cal Arts I really thought I was going to go there because it's such a cool school. I don't know if you've visited before.
I have, like, once, but I have friends who've gone and who all seem to have had great experiences.
Yeah, I just felt like it was too avant-garde for me. Like, I knew if I'm going to go study music, I need I need boundaries. I need a regimen. I need someone to like actually teach me, not like go off on some, I couldn't go to this like hippie school. It was just I took one of the classes that I audited there was theory. And I'm like, ooh, man, I'm going to learn some music theory. I'm also one of the only ones I know that really enjoyed music theory. Like, I couldn't wait for that class. But I sat in on the class, and it was just, there was no desks, no chairs. It was like bean bags and rugs on the floor.
Oh, wow. That's way more hippie than I realized.
Yeah. And
that's funny.
The whole class was just like shooting the shit about, I don't even know what, but not music, and certainly not music theory. And at the end of the hour, the professor was like, oh, did anyone do that homework assignment I gave last week? And nobody had. And he's like, next week then.
Holy shit. This is like, this feels like a scene from a film. It's like a caricature
or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Or totally like Christopher Guest, mockumentary music school.
It's hard. It's crazy. Especially because the interest in the avant-garde often is from the other way. It's like all about, let's sort of burn down the establishment. But that often comes in this like hyper intellectualized, like really the kind of super chill vibe is almost, it's like this horseshoe where they kind of meet at the same conclusion, I guess. But the flavor I associate, the people that I've known that have gone there have definitely been on that sort of hyper, where they want to write a piece which requires, diagrams or 3D printed models to fully understand the piece of music. Like, there's a certain that very classic, right. Like late 20th century sort of, just I don't know how else to describe it than say hyper intellectualized.
You can't even play it unless you're thinking in 4 dimensions.
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, exactly.
Then one of the other classes I took was just this like ensemble thing. You go in, there's instruments everywhere, and it's like, all right, pick up an instrument you've never played before and get ready to play it. And it's like, okay, somebody call out a key, and someone's like C flat minor, something stupid, or C double flat minor, and it's like, okay, great, and tempo like 240, and then okay, what's the meter? 14/8, just something ridiculous. And then it's like somebody was conducting, and it was just it was like walking into like the Guitar Center from hell, where it's just a cacophony.
I can only
and
imagine.
and I was just like, get me out of here.
Yeah, a bunch of students that are all trying to play lead also, I'm sure. That's always the classic, like, when people don't really learn how to jam together and kind of be conversational about it. Everybody's just trying to hold center court, you know what I mean? And
Right.
does not work.
Yeah. So I plus it was very expensive to go there. Um, so then I went to UCLA, took a couple classes. I really gelled with that place, and it's just so beautiful. Um, so yeah, I wound up at UCLA studying music. Midway through my undergrad, I had now given up the like, oh God, I don't want to teach. That looks absolutely horrible. Um, and I thought, well, maybe, film would be great. And now I'm starting to listen to more film scores. And so I was scoring a lot of student films and, trying to find my Spielberg. And I was not having any luck. And I feel like every generation that goes through film school, all their beginning films, it's so rare to find that one gem that's like this visionary. And it's like, oh man, this person made like this amazing film on like no budget, and you can tell they're going to go somewhere. It was all the films I did were either like coming to terms with like your parents' mortality, or coming to terms with your own sexuality. And I was just like, I don't want to see any of these movies. Um,
I mean, student films, that's just, yeah. Likewise scored a lot in back in the day, and there is definitely like three or four templates seemingly that most of them, it's like a lot of teenage angst that is coming a little bit late. They're like hanging on to it because they're all now in their early 20s, but it's still that kind of, how do I explore this? And the worst of them definitely think they're the first person to ever make a film about this. Like you said,
right.
like somebody who's like, my parents got divorced, and I'm pretty sure I'm the first person to ever have to deal with that as a kid. And I'm the first person to make a film about it. And I heard some pretty brazen things from filmmakers like USC. I was at USC, but I'm sure a similar vibe. Where, yeah, that was like, you don't understand. This is my mark on the industry. Like, we need to do this film properly and to the highest degree, because this will start my career. It was like, I would hear things like that, and I'd go, it's about a guy who's staring at a teddy bear and then has like a close up of the single tear, and like, that's your film. Well, this is not entirely sure whose life you think you're going to change, but anyway, yeah,
Yeah. Then you
those.
go to the film festival and you've got to watch 25 of those, and it's like,
Oh boy,
oof.
yeah. Talk about, isn't it crazy how a 1 hour block of shorts can feel like you're watching like 7 David Lean films in a row of just these,
Yeah.
time slows down. There are those occasional real brilliant student, like every now and again, there are one of those people that really does get it. And they really, and even if they're also just like expressing teenage angst, but they have, like, genuinely do have that spark, and find something, a new, unique way to express it, or a unique take. And it seems like the challenge now, I mean, I don't even know what it's like for a student, in 2023 going to school, because the technology has also gotten to such a point that someone who has a real eye for production value is inherently less special than they were, I think, when you and I were students, where the tools were so
Right.
much more basic that, like, the default was to look like shit. And every now and again, there'd be somebody who really knew how to shoot as well.
Yeah, but now, I mean, if you have that vision, but you didn't have, I'm sure there were so many people back in the day that didn't have the budget. And I remember like, oh, where am I going to find a camera? I got to shoot this thing. Like, oh, so and so's got a camera. Their dad has one. I'm going to borrow it for the weekend. now if you've got a new iPhone, like that camera is way better than anything that they're using to shoot when I was in school.
Plus all this software, just like stock software that will do, real time white balancing and color correction and all these, like, even on a basic level, what they'll do to fix a lot of your shortcomings as a filmmaker, because you just don't know. Like they can, like I'm an idiot when it comes to photography, and these things make me look like I know what I'm doing because you just push a few presets and it's like,
Right.
looks amazing, So yeah, the equalizer of all that. But in any case, so all that said, so you start looking at film, you're looking at student films, and you're not overly blown away by the opportunities that's presenting.
Yeah. By the way, this has now turned into the extra director's cut version of the story.
I love it. I love it. No, but it's great. I have picked up on an interesting thread that I want to ask you about, but I don't want to derail you more than I already have.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll continue, and then you just interrupt whenever you want. So anyway,
Good.
so I thought film, and then it's like, boy, I just want to write Star Wars so bad, and like how can I make myself available in case John's busy? I just don't want to do all these little 5-minute dramas at school. Like I'm ready for something bigger. I was certainly not. Um, and then somebody, I was a gamer as a kid, and then I kind of phased it out for a while. And then a friend of mine was like, "Man, have you played this new game called Outcast?" I was like, "No." And he's like, "Dude, you would love the music. It's so good. It sounds like Star Wars. It's amazing."
You
And
mean
I looked,
the Lenny Moore
yeah,
Outcast?
yeah. And I heard it. Somebody, I don't know, had a tape or something probably, and
Right, yeah.
I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" And then you find out like it was recorded with a live orchestra and choir in Russia,
I was gonna say, yeah,
and
Moscow is like one of the really
yeah,
rare, yeah, super unusual.
we can get back to the whole Lenny Moore as a mole story later, but um, but I was like, "Oh my God, this is what I want to do." Like games, last time I played them, it was all chiptune stuff, and now that there's like live orchestra playing the kind of music that I like dream of writing. So I'm gonna switch gears and try to get into games. And so I kind of had this in my head. I had no idea how to get into games, but I was trying to make friends, and I made a friend of a friend that worked at Atari, and I would occasionally like go have lunch with this guy, and trying to be like, "Oh, I hear you're working on a Matrix game," which they were, and it was the most expensive game like of all time then, and I think it cost like $20 million or something, and uh, but yeah, just really laser beamed in on games, and then it was time to graduate, and it's like, oh my God, I've had student loans and like a structured environment, and how to like they taught me how to write a chord progression and how to modulate, but how do you make money? Like, how do you leave school and then like convince somebody to pay you to write music for their project? And I had no idea. And so I tried to stay in school. I approached the dean of the music department, and it's like, "Hey, I feel like I want to stay for my master's." And this guy, it all worked out in the end, but he was like, "Chris, I heard that you want to do video game music. That's the rumor going around." And I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we consider that to be low art." And
Say those words.
he literally said low art.
Holy
And
shit.
and he's like, "Just, we don't need that coming back to school. You're not offering anything to the curriculum here. Just get your degree and good luck. Don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out."
Wow.
So I left at my with my PRO. I'm with CSAC now, and you've got to open up your publishing company, and mine is low art music.
I love it. You've immortalized that conversation rather nicely. I think probably anybody that was in any kind of conservatory environment that was taking an interest in film and TV or games, or God forbid something even pragmatic like scoring commercials, doing jingle work as it was called back in those days, have versions of this kind of story. This kind of like, you really like you really want to debase yourself. It's like it's as if you've just volunteered that you want to be a porn star, and talking to some like runway model who's like, but that's so below you. Like there's this sense of there's art, and then there's whatever that is, and certainly got my doses of that. Although I always had this feeling that UCLA was like one of the hip bastions, my impression was that because in particular being in LA, where there's all these artists everywhere who are earning a living, particularly in the film industry, and feeling like artists and respected as artists and having these big platforms for their art, like the Oscars and whatever, that a school like that would, have, it's just amazing to me to hear somebody say a thing like that in an environment like that. But I guess everybody
Yeah, you'd
wants
think
to
so.
punch down to somebody. So they're like, okay, well, film is finally getting its due. So we need somebody we can shit on. Now that's games are the kid brother, I guess. Maybe that's a bit of the cycle
Right.
there. It's like all these jaded opera and symphonists who begrudgingly embrace film, but want to be able to kick somebody in exchange, I guess.
And the layout of the school too, it made no sense because there's like the music school here, and then way across campus is the film school. And I would walk there. That's how I was finding my little gigs. And you would find all these pages all over the bulletin boards, like pick a number thing, and it was like, help, I need a composer. And the film students had no idea. They're like, oh, the music school is way down at the other end of campus. You should go there and post. They're posting in the film school, and I was like the only composer making that trek over there to try to find work. Um, I don't know, just so weird. But yeah, after I left, they actually hired Jerry Goldsmith to come and teach. So they
No
did
kidding.
eventually embrace, other kinds of music for media.
Yeah, I knew that he uh kind of dipped his toes in there. And did you ever meet Brian Min? He
I don't think
he
so.
he used to be the audio director for Double Fine, um, and now he runs a company selling like USB typewriters that he invented that are super awesome. Um, Really cool guy. And anyway, he had gone to UCLA, and James Horner had been. This was like in the early '80s, right before Horner's career took off. He was sort of teaching to get by, and Horner was literally one of his teachers, his like theory teacher. And I said, "How was he?" And he was like, "Oh, terrible teacher." He was so like in his own head, and I was like, "That scans." I fully believe that. I always figured Jerry Goldsmith was um, probably similar. Like he's such a genius. To me, he's my absolute gold medalist of film music, and I can't picture him as this incredible educator, but I don't know. So you were ships in the night. So all right. So then at some point this translates then into an actual first game, and I thought it was Battlestar Galactica, but correct me if I'm wrong. That was because tell that story because I like that story.
It is. I do consider Battlestar Galactica my first game. I did have one prior to that called Gunman Chronicles, and that happened while I was in school actually. And there was this whole mod community.
Mm-hmm.
Half-Life had just come out. They were taking
Yeah.
the Half-Life code and modding it into other games, and there was just tons of like single person developers like modding Half-Life in their spare time.
Right.
And I reached out, on message boards, and I found the ones that I thought looked pretty cool. And I hooked up with these guys. They were doing this game Gunman. It turned into Gunman Chronicles, and that actually uh, got released. It got bought by Valve, and
Really?
they released it, and it was like in a big box. I have it's in here somewhere. I've got it like my Gunman Chronicles box. That really technically was my first game, but then there was like 6 years after that with where there was nothing, and so
I see.
I just I had I'm living in LA. It's was way cheaper then than it is now, but it was still for a guy that's trying to make it as a composer. So I did everything. I roofed houses. I was a waiter. I was a bartender. I was a busboy. I cleaned out wells in a forest.
Never
I
heard
worked
that
at a
one
women.
before.
Yeah, I worked at a women's clothing store for 1 or 2 days. Um, in the back, the trucks come in with just boxes and boxes of like just women's clothing, and they're all in the cellophane, and you got to pull that out and you put it into this machine and you steam them so that they're wrinkle free. And that was my job. I was steaming
That's
dresses and stuff,
funny.
and it was hot back there.
I
I
would
couldn't
not
take it.
survive. Yeah.
No, no, no. I could one day, and I was like, I'm done. Um,
That's the well. How do you land a job cleaning wells? I just need to make an aside on that because that's one of those where if you told me go find a job cleaning wells, that's your challenge. Like we're on the Amazing Race right now. I would have no idea where I didn't even know that was a thing.
uh, yeah, I think I got that job like through a contact from my mom because she was working.
She's a
I forget
headhunter
what
for all the well
she.
cleaning agencies.
No, she worked for the Girl Scouts, and they were doing some kind of like weekend retreat thing, out in the forest somewhere. And their water was, well water, and there was something blocking them, and so they needed people. They needed, some able-bodied young men to be lowered down into wells and like pull out giant rocks that were in there. Um, so that's that's what I did. It is cold down in a well, let me tell you.
That's so
Um,
funny. Wow, I
anyways,
love that. I hope it paid amazingly.
I don't think it did. I think it was probably minimum wage. Um, oh my God, I'm just having these like flashbacks of that. That
That's
was
a very
that,
novel one. I love that for all of our kind of mythology, like Lassie mythology of getting trapped down the well. I haven't met a lot of folks who it's like, no, I was down there by design.
yeah, willingly. It's intentional. I'm down here.
Yeah, I'm down here for my $7 an hour or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, that's um, that's quite something. I like the thing that I was saying before was I was picking up as a bit of a thread. You've kind of mentioned offhandedly, and I'm trying to like find the interesting little snapshots of it. Is that it seems like you're somebody that greatly values kind of order and structure. When you were talking about you really took to theory, for example, that's somebody that likes to find patterns, that likes to sort of see how things operate and look for the kind of clockwork mechanisms that undergird the structure, and the things that you're bouncing off of are the very kind of chaotic and free form. Is that a fair assessment? Do you feel like, or at least as you were back in those days, maybe you've evolved since then?
That's a good question. I've never because I tend to feel like no, I'm more kind of free form. Like I hate the rigidity of
Hmm.
of structure, but maybe I don't. Maybe
Have I just
it's
changed your
funny
entire
because
self-assessment?
I because people ask me, oh, how long does it take you to write whatever blah 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 minutes of music? And if it was up to me, I'd be like forever. Like I'll just
Yeah,
never finish. I'll be
right.
working on this one cue until the day I die. Like it's never going to be quite right. I always have to go back to it and tweak something. But if you tell me it's due tomorrow or 1 week or 1 month, that's exactly how long it's going to take.
Yep. Yep. I know that feeling all too well. Yep. I often will say to folks, my little shtick description of that is I say the process is like a gas in a jar. It will just expand to the size and shape of whatever it has to work with, and that's what it needs. So if you,
That's I say the same thing, but I do the alligator in an aquarium. I'm like, it'll grow to its environment.
Yeah. Yours is way cooler. Mine always gives people like weird mental images, uh, or they've like never thought they like didn't take that physics class, so they don't have any clue what the fuck I'm talking about, and they're kind of like a gas in a jar. So yeah, I like the alligator in the aquarium is definitely superior. Um, so all right, so how did you what? Because I love that so many of these stories. I've done a bunch of these now, and a lot of times, especially folks that are getting in around that time, that kind of like early 2000s or even just any time really before 2010, a lot of the things that they have in common are someone who kind of stumbled into the industry. They were very often chasing film, or they were doing something else, or they were playing with their band, and they kind of tripped in. You're one of the rare ones who kind of manifested it, where you went, okay, that I really want to do that. Now, once you get past around 2010, I think sort of people who were growing up around that time, they're hearing scores like the original God of War and things like that, and that's their lightning bolt. And so yeah, okay, that becomes increasingly common for people to pursue games because they're directly inspired by games. So you're a bit ahead of the curve in that way, which makes it interesting. So what Battlestar Galactica is like a full on. This is not a mod that got lucky, which arguably would be the case on the Gunman thing. If that's essentially a mod that went
Basically,
the distance, it's like Counter-Strike. So how does Battlestar Galactica come about?
yeah. Okay. Whew, we're finally there. Jeez. Um, so the final job that I had, I mean, now, so I graduated, had all
The
these
final
jobs,
like day job, you mean?
well, what, blah, blah. Yeah. Final day job. And this is like 6 years down the road from graduation. Um, I am working as a telemarketer, and by far, I would I would jump down a well all day long if rather than call people that didn't want to hear from you and try to sell them something they don't want. That was the most soul crushing job for me personally, and I was terrible at it because I just didn't care. I'm like, call somebody up, hey, do you want this thing? Nope. Okay, have a great day. That. Oh, sorry. Um, and I wouldn't read the script. I would not try to talk people into it. I just wanted you can feel the tension as soon as you call and you're like, oh hi, is this Mr. And then you're trying to like, oh my God, I don't even know this name. I'm gonna butcher their name. And then instantly you feel that tension of like, "Ugh, what is this? Who is this person calling me? Like what how do I get off the phone quickly? Oh, it's just awful. Uh,
How many times does one typically make a sale out of say 100 calls?
that for me, maybe one in 100. For other people that were actually good at that and they enjoyed it, you would hear them like in the little booth next to me, like sweet talking people and just making them feel like, hey, I'm your best friend and I want this for you so bad. And it was infectious and people be like, oh, well, wow, thanks. Like, I can't believe you called me out of everybody and you're offering this. Like, oh, where do I sign up? Um,
It's so hard for me to picture because I I have never every time that I've ever gotten a call, I've always been the like, look, I'm just gonna. I know that it's a numbers game for you. I'll try to make this easier for you, and I'm gonna bounce out now because I do have a sympathy. Most people who work those jobs are probably similar to the position you were in. This is something that they are doing between things, and I can totally my heart will go out to them, and I'm like I don't want to be a dick, so let's just like mutually agree to call it here, and
yeah.
and they'll
I,
often go okay great, and but
yeah, and I obviously have so much, empathy for them as well, having done the job. So I really try to be friendly, but same thing. I'm like, look, I already have solar. I really don't need it. Can you please, can you please take me off the list? Well, sir, and you could hear they're just like they didn't even listen to you. They're like, I have to read my whole script or I'm going to get in trouble. And I'm like, please, please, I'm begging you, like just stop. I don't want to have to hang up on you. And
yeah, exactly.
it's hard. Anyways,
So that was the last
so
one. That
that
was
was the
your
last
grand
one.
finale of like
Yeah.
journeyman work.
So uh, in the meantime, even though I had no experience, I had an agent, which a lot of people had, who was Bob Rice. And Bob definitely, he was really my first mentor. Um, but he played the numbers game, which is like cast a wide net over anybody that was interested in doing music for games. And then if something lands, he's like, which is what happened. He's like, I've got all the video game composers. And at one point, he really did. I mean, like
Yeah, he was the
everybody.
only one who took it seriously. I mean, when I
Yeah,
got
for
into the
sure.
business, he was the only agent. Even GSA hadn't uh, gotten in yet, and they were kind of the first, sort of non like traditional composer agency, seemingly to
Yeah,
really kind of pay attention. But yeah, for years, for my first like 5 GDCs, he was the only person there who was in this category, who took any interest.
totally. Yeah, and I mean, he was a great guy. He was a total like I don't want to say father figure to me, but definitely like a really cool uncle. And
Right.
I just love to be around him. And the fact that this guy like took me in and believed in me, and it just meant the world to me. And so, but he couldn't pitch me. I had no credits. I didn't even really have the gear for this, but I would call him every few months. Hey, Bob, this is Cris Velasco. Remember me? I'm really looking for a job. Like anything coming up? Can I pitch on anything? And it was always like, oh yeah, I got your demo out everywhere. And but then that one time, I get a call from him. And he's like, Chris, I've got an opportunity. Battlestar Galactica demo due tonight by 5 p.m. And it's like in the morning, same day. And it's just like, what? That's oh my God, that's how it works. That's so fast. And which is not how it
Get your
works.
clicking finger ready to click in those notes.
Yeah. Uh, so I called work. They knew that I ultimately wanted to be a professional composer, and I said, guys, I finally have my shots. Like I'm pitching Battlestar Galactica. How amazing is this? So I got to take today off so I can write this demo. And they're like, well, sorry, Chris, but you gotta. I don't know if you got your uh, TPS report, but or PTS report, but it's like, no, we need you. We need you in here today. We're short staffed. You got to come in. And it's like, well, so obviously I quit. Um, and I was talking to a few friends. I'm like, oh my God, I've got this opportunity. Like, holy crap, I'm losing my mind here. And I quit my job. And it was like, what? And they'd seen me struggling for 6 years and not making any headway. And just everyone kind of knew like, oh man, Chris is that guy that's eventually going to be sleeping on our couch. Um, like we're gonna have to pass him around the different apartments and like feed him for a week and let him stay here because he's obviously eventually going to lose his apartment. Um, and this poor guy like has this dream that's just going to go unfulfilled, and that really sucks for him. But it is what it is, and that's how I was feeling too. So everyone's telling me like, "Oh my God, no, don't do it, Chris. Like, forget that demo. Like, there's no chance. You gotta, you gotta go back to work." Um, and it was really kind of shocking. I kind of always felt that people maybe felt that way, but it was shocking to kind of hear it like, Chris, no, no, no. This, I hate to tell you, but this dream is over. Like, you didn't, it's not going to work out for you. Like, we're so sorry, but be a telemarketer. That's, that's, you don't have to stay there forever, but you have to stay there now because you got to pay your rent. And anyways, finally here we are at the end of the story, but I pitched for it. I listened to that. It was the original Battlestar, not the remake. Um,
Right.
but I used to watch that with my mom, as a kid, and so I knew the theme so well. And I went back and I listened to I had, Stu Phillips' Battlestar Galactica like album on iTunes, if there was even iTunes then. But anyways, I was listening to it. I'm getting familiarized with it. Wrote a piece that incorporated his theme, but like did some twists and turns on it, and turned it in at like 4:30 or something. And it's like, whew, just under the wire. I get 5 minutes later a phone call, and and the caller ID says Infogrames. And I'm like, wait, that's the company that's making Battlestar Galactica. Like, oh my God, they're like, I got the job. Like they're calling me to give me the job. This is unbelievable. And it was the audio director, and he's like, "Hey, Chris, we got your demo. Like, we love it. It is amazing. I can totally feel the passion. You totally know the style. Yeah, I can tell you're a fan of Stu. We love it so much. We have no idea who you are or how you heard about this, but we were not expecting a demo from you. And unfortunately, we just hired somebody. This was like the last day. We told all the composers we'll let you know end of day on, whatever day that was. And surprise, surprise, you turned something in that we love, but we've already made a decision and already called that composer. So, like, so sorry, but we'll keep you on the roster, like next time, like you'll be a first call to pitch and whatever. And it was just so heartbreaking.
Although
And
it's
I
worth
thought,
pointing out that to even get the call to even get a call like that is a very rare. Normally it's just screaming into a void, right? And you just know, then you never even know if they listened or anything. I mean, the number of times there's been demos or send in a reel of existing material over the years where you just don't
yeah,
have any clue.
the
It's
game comes out
really,
a year later and you go, oh, I guess I didn't get that gig.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the number of times every year now, the new trend lately has been all the big trailer reveals at the Game Awards, where it's like every third trailer is like, I forgot about that. I demoed on that 2 years ago and I forgot it existed, and I wonder who they ended up hiring. It's like this
Right.
constant that happens all the time. So it's really cool of them, even if it's bearing heartbreaking news, especially the gamble you took. I do think it's really awesome that they were like, you know, we got to let this guy feel the love because he went kind of,
Yeah, so
above and beyond.
that for sure doesn't happen anymore, but this was early 2000s, and um, the game industry was a little bit different back then.
Yeah, sure.
A little more
But
mom and pop feel almost,
right.
kind of. Uh, but after that, I was like, okay, well, I gave it my best shot. I quit my job. I called them back to see if I could have it again, and they said no. And part of me was relieved that I didn't have to do that anymore. But I was like, well, the only other thing I like doing these days is cooking, so I'm going to go to culinary school and become a chef. So I was looking into local cooking schools in LA, and then I'm like filling out the application form, and I get a call. This is like a day or maybe 2 days later, and it's the same guy. He said, "Chris, I just can't stop listening to your demo, and I really like it, and I know how disappointed you were, and I just want to give you a shot. So we're going to give you one cinematic to score, and it's about 2 minutes long. And do you have like here's how much we can offer, but like do you have can we do the deal? Do you need to talk to your agent or whatever?" And I was like, oh my God, like yes. And I put him in touch with Bob Rice, and it's just like I'm gonna make enough money off this one cinematic to like pay my rent and buy groceries this month. Like, oh my God, I'm a professional composer. Like I just paid my bills with music. And I put everything I had into that one cue and turned it in. They loved it. Like no revisions. I get a call a week later. Do you want to do another one? We've got all these cinematics, and um, we just love what you did. Like, here, just do another one. And I did it, and then another, and another. And then at one point they said, we just like what you're doing so much. We actually let go of the composer that we hired, and we just want you to score the game. And
So rare.
it was insane. And then from there, there was still the audio director. He was also kind of an in-house composer, but they were doing enough stuff and he had too many other responsibilities so they were still doing some outsourcing. But from there, the next game, like I scored their next 3 games after that, and they mostly did games for kids. And one of them, the second one, was Barbie of Swan Lake, which I can proudly say now that Barbie is cool again. Um, but I worked on Barbie. I did some other kids game for them, and then they did a Van Helsing game, and I got to
Mm.
co-write on that. And we actually went up to Seattle and recorded that live. And
Was that your first
in the,
time doing a proper session on a game, a
yeah,
Van Helsing game?
yeah.
What I love did you ever know? I'm not asking you to name names, but did you ever know who they let go on Battlestar? Like,
I do.
is that like someone about town? Like, because that's a did any of their music stick in the game? Like, is it one of those that you end up kind of riding shotgun, or did it all eventually kind of get filtered out?
I think I replaced it all, and yeah, I do know who it is. Um, it's somebody that you would know for sure, but I'm not going to say.
No, no, yeah, no, I wouldn't ask you to. I would because I never like I've been on both sides of that as well. I've had situations where the ground was kind of turning to sand below my feet, and I was like, I think this is not going well. And then, sure enough, sort of things I kind of got Thanos snapped out of a project. And I've also been that person where like you're just kind of riffing, and then before you know it, what you thought was a shared gig or something ends up kind of being your gig, and you're like, well, I promise I wasn't trying to screw you. Like there's been so it's a complicated world. Some people it's dynamic, and people make the decisions that they think is right for the project, and sometimes you're the beneficiary of that, and sometimes you're not, and you just try to keep your head above water. And so I don't begrudge any of the angles on that, but that's where I had forgotten. I remembered the story. The reason why I love to prompt you to tell it even this indulgently, I love it, especially because I think one of the kind of core crowds for this podcast are people just getting started, and I love really exposing all the intricacies, because so often, especially in a career like yours, you've just done so many games at such a high level that it's so easy to just somehow see it as that was this inevitable path. And I remembered very much I guess I got to quit my job and just go for it. That story struck a chord with me whenever I first heard it or read it in an interview with you or something like that. That I really love to hear, like the kind of blow by blow that it took to get there. I had actually completely forgotten, if I even knew, that the other person ended up being kind of fully phased out of it. And so it goes. I also love that the Barbie thing is such a point of pride. Jack Wall also has a Barbie game that he did. It was like, I think it was Barbie that like 20 years later, that audio director looked him up and remembered working with him and hired him on Call of Duty Black Ops. And it was like, I love that story. It's for the similar reason that it's like these things that feel like little, seeds in the water, can become a career defining opportunity. And I love exposing those stories. They're endlessly just inspiring and reminders of, just do your best work. It doesn't matter what it is.
Oh man, that's what I get asked, of course, all the time by, kind of up and comers, like, how do I get into games? And
Cleaning
I always
wells, always
one
recommended.
one thing I always tell them, I'm gonna maybe I'll do this one day. It seems like it's all the rage now to write a book. Um, but I'm like, well, you got to read my new book, which is called How to Get Struck by Lightning.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and it's just like I can't even
It's a great title,
fathom
actually. That's a great idea.
the steps throughout my own past that led me to that point. And so, it's just, it's like Jurassic Park and Chaos there. It's like, look at the drop of water like running down your arm, and like, oh, it hit a little hair there, it took a turn. And it's just so impossible. But yeah, one thing I always tell people is like, just, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, I was so happy to be working on Barbie. Of course, I did my best work. And even now, if I get a project that I'm not super excited about, um, I will always do my best work, and you make it exciting. I did. That's kind of a great segue into a game that I did that just came out called Fae Farm. Like
Mm,
my musical gaming history is all these like big sci-fi, horror, action, epic stuff.
right.
And other than that Barbie game that I never really have talked about in 20 years, um, I've never done any sort of a, not necessarily a kids game, but something cozy like a farming sim.
Right.
Like that's so far off my radar of like what I like to play and what I would ever listen to or ever dream of composing. And so I was told like, hey, there's this game, we really want you to write the music for this. And I was like, oh, I don't think so. That's like, I can't even begin to know what I would do. And then, and then I got into it and it's like, no, Chris, like, we insist this game is really important for us, and the company and you're doing it and just like dive in and have fun. And so instead of being like, ugh, I don't know. And I didn't listen to any other farm games either. I didn't listen to Animal Crossing or
Right.
whatever the other ones are, Stardew Valley.
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
I've never played any of those. I've never listened to any of those. I just thought like, okay, this music is going to be my interpretation of like what a cozy game should be.
Mm,
And it just turned into one of the like most positive, like coolest experiences of my composing career. Like I woke up and I was so happy to be working on it every day. Um, it just opened my my creative like circle more than what I thought it was. I just for this longest time was like, this is what I do. Like, sorry, cozy farming falls outside my
right.
circle here. And then once I got over that, it's just like, wait, we can all play together actually. And it was just so cool. And it definitely opened up a door in my head that was like, now I've got this new like cool bag of tricks, I feel.
Right.
And and I find that stuff like populating other things that I do now. I'm like, oh yeah, I get this now. Like I can do this here in this different way. And it's causing me to, honestly, it totally leveled me up as a composer,
It's
all
so
these years and
interesting.
games later.
It's fascinating to hear that. Always fascinating to hear people's kind of self diagnosis or self analysis of what they perceive their thing is or their strength. I mean, obviously, your pedigree from God of War, working on Bloodborne, and a lot of these like super ultra dramatic, epic, like gothic. It probably all started with Van Helsing. That's just sort of like really, really big. I mean, and talk about manifesting the dream. I want to do Star Wars, that like big orchestral statements, huge kind of sweeping. You definitely seem to have cornered the market on that. But, but I've always really loved you've, especially the last few years, you've done a lot of things where what you're describing isn't as a field of those as probably, it's like you have this mental image of yourself, but you've done a lot of things. Like I really liked um, the crap. I'm trying to remember. I'm suddenly blanking on the name of the game, but I remember it had these utterly delightful clarinet solos in the theme. It was very
Oh,
um,
Groundhog Day.
yes, yeah, okay, yeah. So like this whole other wheelhouse, or the what was the kind of clue who done it
The Invisible
um
Hours.
invisible, yeah, also loved that score, really, really totally not the big bombastic, let me show you how to kind of shake a mountain thing that you do seemingly so effortlessly. And so it is funny that this, like, I get that even those have their darkness or their kind of dramatic quality that's very different than the kind of cozy farming sim. I totally get that even those probably feel to you closer, but the eclectic capabilities that you have been on display quite abundantly from my point of view for years. So it's just fascinating to hear I don't know how to do that, and it's like you I would, if had I been in the room, then I'd say, really, you don't think that you can? It's you've stretched a lot, man. Like in the best way. Not to mention
Yeah, it
Carrion,
just,
which I fucking loved. Um, like
oh my
as
God.
a
I just got,
totally
wait, I'm
non
going to
like
show
a,
you something.
oh please, yeah.
I just got this yesterday in the mail. Materia Collective put out the ultimate vinyl set. This thing is like super heavy. This
Yeah,
thing
that's
must weigh
gigantic. This is Carrion.
like,
It's a little pixelated on here. I will
oh,
enjoy. It'll be properly kind of high def in the actual final video because the local record is nicer. So I will come back. I will bookmark this.
gotcha.
I will
Yeah,
like and subscribe to this channel and return to check it
so
out.
yeah, when I was in high school, I was so into like punk rock and metal, and I just loved, you'd go buy a record or even the CDs, they used to come in the big boxes. Um,
Yep.
but it would have the album art on there. And then, as you can maybe see around my studio too, I'm
Oh,
way
we're gonna
into
get to
art.
the art. Yeah, the art thing is a
Okay.
big topic I want to broach before we reach the end for sure. Do you have a hard out? I don't want to just use your time forever.
Like one-ish, maybe a little after one. We
Oh,
got an
okay, that
hour
should be
or a
plenty. That
few.
should be plenty.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, so, so kind of art and music have collided for me in just the coolest possible way. And I discovered that, like, oh man, these old metal bands and punk bands used to commission artists to do their album cover, and I've always wanted to do that. And usually it's like, oh no, we're going to use key art from the game,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
or I just have like no say in any of that. Usually,
yep.
half the time I can't even do like track order or name my own tracks or whatever. It's just like
Yeah,
it is what it is. And I'm just happy to get it out there. But
right.
on Carrion, I discovered this game on Twitter, and I didn't follow any of the guys. It was like two guys in Poland making this game, and somehow somebody like must have retweeted something, and it somehow wound up in my feed. But all it was this little animated GIF of like a tentacle,
Right.
like grabbing somebody and like propelling itself around this maze. And just the way it looked, I was like, ah, this is so cool. Like there's something that's really speaking to me. Like, I don't know what this thing is, but I want in. And so I reached out, um, found out who was making it, found out like it is a game, but it's like it's so early. I'm like, dude, I want to write the music for this so bad. And they kind of looked at my credit list. They're like, we're like two guys in Poland. We don't have any money. We can't wow, thanks so much for the offer, but like, there's no way we're going to be able to afford that. And I told them like, don't even worry about that. Like worst case scenario, I do it for free. I just love your vision and I want to be a part of this so bad. Like there's something really speaking to me on a cellular level here. And so
On a
did this game.
mutating, flesh-eating cellular level.
Right. So did the game. They let me, I kind of retained the rights to my music. And then I was like, wait a minute, I can decide like what goes on the cover for the album. And I'm going to commission some of my favorite artists to do artwork for it. And so I commissioned three different pieces. One is the one that's just like the regular Carrion album that you can find.
Hmm.
Actually, I'm just going to grab it too. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I'm glad you did because that game was one of those where it was a very you game. It was one of those, as soon as I saw it, it just felt like, of course, just because I know the kind of art you're into, it just struck me as this is the kind of game whose poster he would have already had, from an exhibition. It really was one of those
Totally.
natural. Yeah,
So
yeah, I
this,
love
I know
that.
there's kind of a glare on it, but um, this was done by a guy named Dan Quintana, he's a good friend and just an amazing artist. And then I released an EP later, um, of some additional tracks we wrote for like a DLC. And then we were up for a BAFTA, and I wrote a track called BAFTA that stands for Badass Freaking Terrifying Alien. Um, and so that went on the EP, and I got this other guy, Chet Zar, to do the album cover for that. And then
It's so funny.
I convinced Materia to do this big like double album, and the album is actually blood filled. Um, which I had a Slayer CD back in the day, and it came in this like blood filled pouch, and I always remembered it, and I was like, that is so freaking cool. Like, one day I want to have like a blood-filled something album. And so I ran it by them, and they're just like, let's do it. And so it's a freaking blood-filled record.
So
Um,
funny.
and
You
then
actually
I got
have to like send in your insurance info so they can make sure it's a match. You know, give you like your O negative or whatever.
yeah, right. Yeah, in case of emergency, you can pop that open. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, someone's like, "Oh, I hope it's your blood in there," and it's like, "It is my blood, sweat, and tears is in there."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't doubt it. Yeah. No, I love that, and that's that one. What I love about that story also um, is much like the very beginning of your career. There's a certain amount of kind of manifesting entailed. You know, one of those that I really love when I talk to composers in particular, where they've achieved a certain plateau of success, where theoretically working on something like there's metrics by which you might judge something as sort of below wherever you feel like you're at, whether it's they have less money or it's, you know, it's a small team, or, you know, they have a really narrow time and you're like, I don't need that anymore. I don't need to crunch, or whatever kind of lens through which you go, this is how I've kind of started filtering things. What I love is that almost every composer, there will be something that violates all those, and they're like, nope, I have to do that. I have to, for whatever reason. This is just a thing that speaks to me, and I love those reminders. I think they're great, just as things to put out into the world. That that no matter how successful one seems to be, it's still very viable to be just driven by the raw passion of it, and like some of your favorite gigs. And then obviously this one bore enormous fruit professionally. You know, this thing of like, I just need to be part of this. I mean, I remember being on the Dice jury, and everybody was like, this one, absolutely this one. And it didn't matter. No one thought of it through the lens of, is this a low budget game or what? It did. No one even, I mean, those juries generally don't think about that stuff anyway. It's just like, how good is the work? But I remember the whole jury being like, this is such a standout. Like it feels like blood, sweat, and tears in the best way. So like, you really got a lot out of it beyond just the joy day by day that it was to work on it, it seems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was, I keep saying like, oh, that was a career highlight for me, but I feel like every project becomes a career highlight for me. I just love writing music so much, and now through the lens of like super big budget AAA to, you know, two-man team, indie, there's not a lot of difference, and I don't approach it differently at all. I mean, maybe in terms of, are we recording, am I recording a solo cellist here, or are we going to Abbey Road? Like there's that,
Right.
but in terms of music and the amount of effort and joy that I get in it, it's all the same to me.
Well, I will say my like most probably treasured game ever as a player has been the Mass Effect franchise, and some of the absolute highlight of Mass Effect is the DLCs, which I know you were a part of on at least 2 and 3, I think.
Hmm.
And so I just can't not prompt you if there's any good stories that are associated with that, just because that's just purely me as a fan at that point. Anytime I have occasion to basically shoot the shit with anybody who was rolling. I had a friend recently who was talking to the actress Marina Sirtis, and like, yes, I'm a big Star Trek nerd, but I said, wait, you're saying that the sort of first major boss fight from Mass Effect 1 actress is someone that I'm 1 degree removed from? That, like, yeah, okay, I do also have a great respect for Counselor Deanna Troi, but come on, this is like a weird weakness for me with anything related to Mass Effect. So I generically prompt you if there's any stories there, because that's a bit aesthetically different from obviously your, these big orchestral scores that you've been doing for so long now. That the general aesthetic of that is obviously so much more electronic and kind of Vangelis-y and um,
Yeah, and all of the orchestra, at least one, two, and three. Well, I mean, I don't know about one, I assume, but I came in to do DLC on two, and then I was working with Sasha at the time, and we scored probably an hour and a half of music for three, and then plus a bunch of DLCs. But none of
right.
that was recorded live. It was always, it never seemed like it was a budget concern. It was always a time thing, which I was always a little disappointed on. I just wanted that feeling of recording Mass Effect with an orchestra. I thought would have been so amazing. I think they did record on, what was the fourth one? I
Andromeda.
didn't
Yeah, I
even,
think you're right. I'm pretty sure
Andromeda.
they did it in Nashville.
Hmm. Uh, yeah, but gosh, do I have any stories about that? I don't, not really, at least nothing that I can really talk about. We-
No, it's all good. I'm always curious, especially I'd forgotten that was a one of the kind of Chris and Sasha gigs, but I guess that makes total sense because to the degree that there is orchestral stuff in Mass Effect, it tends to be, there are exceptions, but they tended to be the kind of hybrid, very like fused production-y kind of sounding stuff, if not just overtly kind of like 80s
right.
analog synth vibe for the rest of it. But it's just I don't know, the juxtaposition of that alongside the Bloodborne or other things that would have been around that same time. They're just so night and day as games that I find my curiosity piqued. And
Well, what was a really trip about something like that, like night and day, is when I was on Fae Farm, I was working on Lords of the Fallen at the exact same time. And that was a trip to switch between the two. But it was very much, I did it by like time of day. It's like, okay, sun's out, we're doing Fae Farm. Like I'm in a good mood. I'm
birds are chirping. Yeah.
birds are chirping. It's night. There's a nice breeze. Having some iced tea in the studio, and it's just like having a great time. And then sun sets, I have dinner, come in, like set the mood lighting in the studio, and and it was all Lords of the Fallen and just like super dark horror fantasy kind of stuff. So that was, I had to figure out a way to separate it though, because it made no sense otherwise.
Right. Yeah, no, I feel that. I've definitely had a couple of those instances of the sort of one represents the palate cleanser to the other. So you kind of, once you spent a few hours doing one, it's like the perfect thing to kind of switch up your day to just hard left turn. It's funny, from the outside, people have a perception that somehow would be really, really difficult, but I find it actually helps. It's such a cathartic relief to be able to kind of go really hard and then just set it completely aside and shift gears into something that has no business. It's when two projects that are kind of similar are side by side that I find very difficult, because the goal is for them to not pollute each other, and one idea accidentally, you're like, before you know it, you're quoting a theme in the wrong game and you're like, fuck, what am I doing?
Oh my God, I did that.
Really?
Have done that. Yeah, I was. Um, maybe someone will go and like find it, but I was doing Company of Heroes 2 and this game called oh no, what was it called? It was another World War II game. Um, I can't even think of what it's called, but they were like same, like World War II, same palette, just orchestral, um, and it at exactly the same time, and that was really hard to
It
swap between two. The only thing that I could kind of hang my hat on was one was supposed to be from like Company of Heroes, was you were playing the Russians, and then on this other one, oh, Enemy Front is what it's called. you were playing from the Polish side. And so for the Polish side, I was like, okay, like famous Polish composer like Chopin. Like I'm gonna put a lot of like Chopin-esque like piano type stuff in the score, and that kind of set it apart for me. But there was definitely some cross-pollination going on.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. People, yeah, sometimes, especially because sometimes these things, they might, you work on one for 3 years, and there's like 1 year in which they overlap. So to the outside world, they are years apart, but they don't realize that there might have been this window where they were coexisting behind the scenes, during production. Well, I want to talk also about the art thing because kind of Carrion was such a wonderful little kind of glancing blow at that, but it's one of my favorite things about you, because especially when I'm talking to schools and stuff, and often you get that very impossible question of what sort of advice do you give to somebody just starting out, where it just feels like you're asking them, it's like summarize the history of the world. It just feels like I don't even know where to begin, because how can I offer advice also without even knowing you and all that kind of thing? It always feels like kind of just an unsolvable thing. So what I've kind of fallen back on is I'll say things like, the most interesting and often most successful composers are almost always independent of their music, interesting people. And they have things in their life that are totally removed from their music, at least on the surface, but probably below the surface, there's a real continuity that you can find if you really kind of get into an analysis on like a psychological level or a philosophical level. But fundamentally, it also just means that they're out avoiding burning themselves out because they have things that they like to do, and they end up meeting people that are not just the same people, and they draw inspiration from something other than just what movie is in theaters right now or what game just came out last Friday or that kind of thing. But they're actually their well, not to be pun adjacent, is full of things beyond just self-referential within the industry, but they're actually out there kind of finding sources of inspiration that may not even be related to music, and whether it's they like to cook, or they do poetry jams when no one's looking, or they're like avid. Like I have a friend composer in the UK. She's this avid like ice water swimmer, and loves to get like put on like 11mm wetsuits and go in fucking frigid waters to go swimming. So much so she ended up creating like a swimwear, like an ice water swimwear line as almost like a side hustle. Like so. That's the kind of stuff where I go, I love when people find something or multiple things. Like some people, I got another composer buddy that it's like when you talk to this guy for an hour, it's like, what have you not done in life? He's like, oh yeah, I was a volunteer policeman for a little while and I did some rescue scuba work. And it's just one of these people who's just kind of bounced through life doing this endless laundry list of interesting things. And so the thing that all this is a long-winded way of teeing you up to just talk about is where you got into this real passion for art, particularly obviously, what we might call fine art or painters, that world, sculpture, so much so that you've curated exhibitions, which I just think is so cool. So however you want to unpack all of that, it's just one of those things that I love when people have a thing. I just love learning more about that thing and how they got into it.
Yeah, well, I've loved art since I was a little kid, and specifically dark art. Like if your painting has a monster in it, chances are I like it.
Right.
And a lot of kids draw, and recently my parents were like cleaning out my old bedroom and closet, and they found my box of drawings, and they're like, here's this thing, we're trying to make room in this. We want to turn this into a gym or something now. Can you take this? And I was looking through it and I'm like, oh my God, everything in here is like a monster.
Right. You telegraphed this.
And then like growing up, when people are like, oh, what do you want to be? And, my friends are like, I want to be a fireman, or I want to be an astronaut, or I wanted to work at Jim Henson's Creature Shop and make monsters. And then, that turned into like the obligatory, like, okay, you're in your your first apartment or whatever with roommates, and you've got, you went to Prince Plus and you've got the Salvador Dali, prints on the wall, or maybe like a Van Gogh something. And
Hmm.
so I did all that, and then uh, I just started eventually just going down this rabbit hole. I mean, that's for me that when we got the internet, that opened up this world of art to me where before, it's like either in books, you could go to Borders and like find like the Frazetta book and look at that cool stuff, or like H.R. Giger and look at that stuff, and
Hmm.
that was all amazing. But unless you went to a gallery, you were not really exposed to anything new. And then the internet just blew those doors open for me. And yeah, total rabbit hole, going down like okay, here's this artist I like, and it's like, wow, wait a minute, it's kind of like, if you like this one, you might like this person and this, and then it just it's like, oh my God, there's so much incredible art out there. And maybe 15, 16 years ago, there was a gallery in Berlin called Strychnine, and they are now closed. But they did a show with three of my like now favorite artists. But I saw that I'm like, wait a minute, you can buy an original painting or drawing or sculpture. It doesn't have to be a print. And it's obviously way more expensive, but I happened to have been, um, in a place financially where it's like, okay, if I buy this one painting, it's not going to ruin me. And the thought of like having something like so personal, like just really blew my mind. And so I bought my first piece, and it shows up, and I do, the whole unboxing thing, and I just remember like having it on the ground, and I just like laid next to it and was just looking at this like, this is the only one in the world. Like, this is absolutely incredible. And it now lives in my home. Like, I'm now the steward of this painting. And which is, I feel like, a big responsibility. If this is a unique thing in all of the world and it lives with you, like, you have a huge responsibility towards that painting, I feel. Uh, and then, I talked to my then girlfriend, now wife, but it's like, what if every time I got like a big paid, every time I get a gig, or maybe even it's just once a year, maybe I can get like a new painting. And, she's like, yeah, go for it. And then that turned into an absolute, like, in the best way, sickness that I developed, that it's like, I have to have art surrounding me at all times. And so my studio is not a typical composer studio. There's no paneling anywhere. I don't have bass traps anywhere.
Right.
It is not treated for sound at all, because I can't bear to lose 1 square inch of wall space for art. And I don't mix in here anyways. I send everything out to be mixed now, so like it doesn't matter if it doesn't sound acoustically perfect in here.
Right.
I just want to create a little cocoon that's like all my favorite things. So it's just like art and instruments, and I've got windows in here. It's not like the windowless studio. So I
Yep.
can look out. I can see, it's actually crazy windy out here now, but the trees are like blowing around like crazy, and I see birds, trying to fly. I can see them now, like these crows, like trying to get somewhere, but that wind is like keeping them in place.
Yep.
Um, but I love my studio, my surroundings so much, and that is all because of art. Uh, and that just opened up, so many more friendships for me too. Like, I've got all my music friends, I've got my childhood friends, but now I've got this huge community of artists. And every year, about 2 times a year, I do this kind of artist party thing where I invite all the local people that they're like, and then they're like, oh, but what about this artist? Do you know this person or this person? And you should invite them over. They'd love to see your collection, and you would totally love their work. You got to get to know them. They're great. And then just other collectors, just like-minded people. And it's just created this little community of artists is so meaningful to me. And just, it's so special to have that outside of music. Like I can't talk about, nor do I want to talk about music all day long. Like I love music with a passion, but like, oh my God, I'm in here working in my studio by myself like so many hours a day. And when I leave it, people are like, oh, what do you listen to outside? I'm like, I mean, I do listen to music like when I'm driving, but nah, I'd rather do other stuff.
Yeah, I totally get that. My girlfriend is a painter, and my whole front room of the studio is just covered in walls of her work. She used to use that room to paint in. Now she sort of stole a spare bedroom at home because she didn't like getting up at 5 in the morning like I do, because I don't work from home. But I love going in there, and it's just like a sea. Her work, it tends to be extremely colorful, and so it's like stepping into a aurora borealis in there. It's just all the walls are covered in these really, really bright and colorful work, sort of in so many ways the opposite of the kind of like monster fest, although there is quite a lot of beautiful color in a lot of those. But yeah, anyway, I just had to ask because I love that. I so get that, and I also really resonate with that, having kind of like a separate community, um, of in like we all have our little kind of outlets and little groups of people that we know, and having one that's so different and so removed from all the rest, you just end up getting exposed to different ideas and different ways of thinking, and different backgrounds, and not every conversation is about which piece of music was your gateway drug. They like don't even have a version of that. It's like a whole other frame of reference on life itself. I think it's so valuable, and it's such a thing I encourage people, to remember to do. We get lost in the hustle of work and keeping opportunities coming, I think, very easily. It's easy to kind of forget to, not miss out on life. And
Yeah.
and your particular manifestation of that, I just think is so cool. And I'm always telling folks about it as, going all in on a passion. This is a great example of that. So yeah, man. No, I just thought that would be a good kind of destination. Of course, I'm happy to, if there's anything. I liked that you brought up Fae Farm. I was listening to Lords of the Fallen when you first released it. I don't know if there's anything you want to mention, since that is a sort of a timely release. I'm certainly happy to invite any sort of plugs or fun stories that you want to get into. But otherwise, I feel really. I love deep dive on the origin story, and then a wonderful scatter shot through the rather amazing career you've had since then.
Yeah, thanks. And I feel I mean, I'm super stoked about Lords of the Fallen. That's a game that when I got approached about it, I'm like, this has potential to be my new favorite game because I just love that Soulsborne stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, this other stuff is so much more interesting than like plugging games like, oh, make sure you go to my website and check out this. Like,
Yeah,
I
no, well,
don't.
but it's nice to tag both, I guess. I love we.
Yeah, for sure. Just had another release last week actually called Song of Nunu. Um,
Oh, I don't know anything about that one.
yeah, it's by my buddies at Tequila Works, who also did The Invisible Hours and Groundhog Day. And they did another game called Guilt, which I
Hmm.
also scored.
I remember that
Um,
one.
those guys, oh man, I just love them so much. I met them in Spain, and they're like family and friends, and getting to work with them it's just such a joy. And I feel like each project I do for them uncovers another side of my own like creativity that I didn't really know about. Kind of like the um Groundhog Day, like clarinet thing. That was like my first kind of like comedy type thing to write
Mm,
for, and that was all because of them. And now Song of Nunu, it was them plus Riot Forge. So it's
mm,
based on like um, these characters from League of Legends, but now they've got their own like little adventure, just the two of them. And I don't know, it's a very personal score too. It's also kind of quite different. It's not the bombastic stuff. It's very heartfelt, and then moments of levity. And but yeah, man, I wish I could. I don't know. I'll have to do this another time, or I'll just tell you. when I'm able. But yeah, I've got something else coming out too that I'm so thrilled about. It was another like bucket list thing for me. So
Mm,
I don't know. Things are good, man. I'm
that's great to hear. How far off is the bucket list thing from the curtain being pulled back on?
it's actually been announced. They told me I game industry can be weird. Like I don't understand how like ta-da, we're announcing this new game and here's everybody that's involved in it. Is that composer? Nope. It makes really no sense to me. But that's the deal on this one. It has been announced, and I think they told me maybe. Well, it's not going to be till next year when I can announce. But the music is already done, recorded, mixed, good to go.
Yeah, I see. All right. Well, people will enjoy guessing, I guess, what that's all about. And then at some point, that will all be out in the open, and this will still be living online. And hopefully, people will update the comment section with with the final answer on that. So, well, awesome, man. Well, dude, really appreciate you taking the time and stepping me through all these great stories.
Yeah, yeah, this is fun. It's I really enjoyed it. This is cool. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.